I'm Darius McDermott from Fund Caliber, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Snowden, Elite Rated Manager on the Artemis Corporate Bond Fund.
Good morning.
Now, we, in the height of the sort of COVID sell-off, dialed into one of your calls, and you referred to a twice in a career buying opportunity for corporate bonds. The previous one having been following the great financial crisis in 2008-9. Maybe talk us through the why you see that similar type of opportunity again.
Yeah, well, during the financial crisis, obviously markets fell massively. So, and corporate bonds fell aggressively as well. And I did feel that the move was so disproportional that I felt that that would be a once in a lifetime opportunity to buy corporate bonds extremely cheap. Obviously, the markets have not faced a pandemic before, or certainly not in the last 100 years. And that caused a big reaction to the market twofold. First of all, risk sold off, so corporate bond spreads sold off, equity sold off, but also at the same time we had government bonds selling off aggressively as well. So what typically happens when equity markets fall, government bond markets rally. On this occasion, everything fell. So not only on the corporate bond side did you get hit with credit spreads widening and therefore the credit markets falling, but also government bonds markets falling as well. So you got double whammy as such. So while the move from a credit spread widening point of view, or the pure credit aspect, wasn't as severe as the financial crisis, the combined impact of government bond markets falling alongside risky assets like equities and corporate bonds fell aggressively. So the all-in fall in the corporate bond market was very severe, and then presented for those with a firm stomach could have bought assets at very cheap levels.
So, but it was yes, you had the prices moving and becoming attractive valuations, but it was that liquidity pump by the central banks globally, which really gave that sort of, for me, a sort of a supercharged opportunity.
Yeah, that's correct. So what we've seen as every crisis unfolds, the central banks and policymakers are much quicker to react. And if you look at what happened in the financial crisis, there was about a 6-month period of time between the collapse of Lehman Brothers and TARP, when the US started buying assets, corporate bonds. On this occasion, it only took a matter of weeks, and therefore, as the pandemic got worse and people realised the full implications of it, the central banks and also from the fiscal response from governments was much more rapid than we have seen previously. So that really helped to put a floor on valuations and then start the market recovering aggressively.
During that period, you were able to rotate some of your portfolio from higher risk bonds to lower risk bonds, but actually not giving up that yield. Maybe if you could explain a little bit about that and give us one or two examples, please.
Yeah, in normal times that would be impossible. So the concept of buying a asset with lower risk with the same amount of yield just doesn't really exist. What we have to bear in mind is the pandemic has created a very unusual recession. So typically what happens in a recession is new orders fall off, but contracts are still in place and revenues slowly decline. With the pandemic, the world stopped in many sectors and many businesses. So it's a very unusual type of recession, and therefore the market had never really dealt with this before, certainly not in living memory. So it was a panic. And the best analogy I can use is babies were being thrown out with the bathwater, and everything sold off as the market started to go down aggressively. And in that dislocation for a brief window of time, the unusual certainly happened. So it was possible to sell, even though we were selling bonds much lower in price than where we bought them, which is typically obviously not what anybody wants to do. Nobody wants to sell at a loss, obviously. No. But if you can sell that bond and buy a better bond that's fallen as much in price, then that makes a lot of sense, which is exactly what we did. So one of the examples is we sold a bank, a subordinated bank bond, BBB rated, and we bought a UK housing association, boring sector, very conservative, very defensive. single A rated. That's a 2-notch uplift in credit rating. So it's a material improvement in credit quality for no yield give up. And the other example, a bit easier to understand perhaps, is we sold Tesco property to buy Vodafone. Now, Tesco property is an entity that owns a lot of the large supermarkets that Tesco own. They have a sale and leaseback agreement with this company. Tesco supermarket, food retail, obviously always does well in a recession, but it is very lowly rated, and we were able to sell up and buy higher rated Vodafone. Telecom companies have operated very strong through the pandemic, and both very defensive sectors. But in that sort of crazy couple of weeks when everything was selling off aggressively, was able to, in not universally, but in many cases, sell higher risk bonds and buy lower risk bonds because of the very unusual nature of the pandemic sell-off.
And in your fund, you do have a bit of flexibility to invest a portion of it in other parts of the fixed income market, for instance, high yield or emerging market debt. Have you seen compelling opportunities in those areas, and have you acted on it, or are those opportunities you think may come over as the cycle matures or the pandemic cycle matures?
Yeah, well, the fund is an investment grade corporate bond fund in its DNA, and that's the overwhelming majority of what we do. And we do have the flexibility to buy high yield in emerging markets. We don't have any direct exposure to EM. One of the reasons why we have that facility is there are some very large companies in places like Mexico, and do you define that as emerging market or developed market? It's debatable. But in terms of high yield, there's been so many great opportunities presented to itself within the current environment in our own core area of investment grade that we haven't had to look further afield. As time goes on, obviously things change, and we do have the ability to do that, but ultimately the vast majority of what we're going to be doing will be investment grade. Now, if you look at my fund since launch, it has had roughly about 10% in what you could define as high yield bonds. But just to clarify that, the vast majority of what we have, and almost overwhelmingly what we have, is split rated bonds or investment grade companies that have fallen on harder times and have slipped down the rating category into high yield and will hopefully in time migrate the way back up. So when you look at our fund, we have a very conservative way of defining our assets, and if you certainly were to take the highest credit rating, we would have very little on high yield, but we have that flexibility. But on the whole, the opportunity set is so broad at the minute, investment grade, I don't see us deviating from that anytime soon.
Stephen, thank you very much. For more information on the Artemis Corporate Bond Fund, please visit fundcalibre.com.